Hey folks, welcome back. Today, I want to talk to you about a pretty important subject when it comes to preparedness. I've been seeing a lot of videos, because I watch a lot of videos, a lot of YouTube channels. It helps me gain or increase my knowledge base. Exposes me to things that I may not have thought of. For instance, if you watched a few of my water filtration video where I spoke about the rainwater catchment system that I have here in the house. That was an idea I got off a YouTube channel. I watched another YouTuber and he had a very similar system. I kind of tweaked it to make it my own and work in my situation. And, now I have a similar system. The same with the hand pump on my well. When I lose electricity, I can, hand pump water directly from my well. That was something I got from another YouTube channel. So, watching all these channels is extremely beneficial, because it increases your knowledge base and it sometimes exposes you. In fact, it definitely does it to me. It exposes me to things that I didn't think of or something. Oh, you get that aha moment, because a lot of this can be overwhelming. And what's worse is when there is a situation like a job loss or a power outage, a weather event. I understand they're here in the northeastern Maryland, north of Baltimore region on Friday. I didn't get to see it. I wasn't in the area. And luckily there was no damage or evidence, here at my house or anywhere in my neighborhood or anything. But we have had tornadoes and, high wind damage in the past. A couple of years ago, a tornado went real close to here and it just left destruction, just like it does in, the Midwest, Tornado Alley, all those other, the viewers down there, the people that live down there, they have to deal with that all the time. I feel for them. Same as with the hurricanes in Florida. And, we saw what happened in North Carolina. A hurricane of that magnitude wasn't something that they normally see, not something that they're normally used to. So they weren't exactly 100% prepared for it. And it was so fast and so violent that even those that were prepared for emergencies, it came on too quick and they couldn't handle it. In that situation, what I try to teach here, or at least what I try to share with everyone, is to try to be proactive to these situations as opposed to reactive. Rather, when the situation happens, whether it's a weather event or even a job loss or a close loved one becomes ill and needs medical care, any of these things that could alter the day-to-day routine of your life. Because face it, we all fall into that day-to-day routine where we just, get up and we go to work and we work all day long and then we come home and we eat, we watch a little TV and, do a little house cleaning or whatever. And then, we go to bed and start the whole process over the next day. I'm guilty of it. I do it too. Having some coffee, so bear with me here. Anything that disrupts that day-to-day routine, sometimes isn't, handled proactively. It's more reactively, meaning, when that weather event comes through, you have to react to it, as opposed to, oh, there's a tree down in my yard. Let me grab my chainsaw and go clean that up. If you don't have a chainsaw or the fuel to put in the chainsaw or a good sharp chain, that's not really being prepared for a situation like that. That's more reacting. Oh, I got to go get fuel. There's a tree down in the yard and I got to go get a new chain. Where can I get a new chain on a Sunday? Let's hope Tractor Supply's open and they have the right size. And, now you're reacting to this event and that's just doubling or tripling the stress load. And that goes with any sort of event. I know a lot of the channels on here, they talk about the apocalypse and civil unrest, and those are the worst case scenarios. And I'm not going to say that I think that none of those scenarios are possible, but because they are, what I try to at least stay in the realm of on my channel is just general preparedness, general emergency preparedness, because I look at things like the apocalypse or, the civil unrest as a worst case scenario. What's the percentage of possibility that can happen? It can, but the percentage is pretty low. Maybe 5%, maybe 10%. I'm not sure. I know with all the craziness going on, we see it on the news, and you never know what the possibility is, but the possibility of a weather event is probably a little higher. We see storms all the time that, affect our regions. A job loss. There's no shortage of companies going out of business and laying people off. And if you're not prepared for, say, that job loss by having, a little bit of a cushion, to cover your bills. Excuse me, I got stuff falling all over the place here. If you don't have that little cushion, of a couple of months of being able to cover your expenses, your bills, it helps if you have some preparations, maybe some food stored in a secondary pantry to where you can go a month without going to the grocery store for a big trip. Stuff like bread and milk and eggs, you still got to go for that, each week or whatever. But as far as the big stuff, the laundry detergent and toilet paper and, some frozen veggies or some canned veggies or, some meats, in your freezer, I try to keep, at least a month, 30 days of that kind of stuff to where if something should happen and, I wasn't able to go to the grocery store, whether it be because society has collapsed and the stores have been looted and there's nothing left, or just I got laid off, from my job and, I can't afford it. I got to pay the mortgage and I got to pay the cell phone bill and I got to pay the car insurance and, all of these other things that you can't really, avoid. The car insurance will get canceled, your house will get foreclosed on, car payment, they'll come take your car. You got to pay those things. But stuff like the grocery store, you can put a little bit back to, to cover those gaps, until you get yourself back to a normal routine of, getting back to work or, whatever the situation maybe you have a relative or a loved one that requires some medical attention and their insurance doesn't cover the full cost, and they need a little extra money for some medications or some home health care assistance or something, just having that little bit of cushion gives you options. And that's really what preparedness is all about. It's about options. If you watch The Sensible Prepper, in fact, his show comes on every week, Tuesday at 12 o'clock. I suggest you don't miss it. Try to catch it. He does upload those afterwards, but he does them live, answers questions. It's a great show. I'm religious about it. I watch it every week on my lunch break at work. I may not get to watch the whole hour that he's on, but I do at least try to catch the majority of it. But, he always emphasizes that, having these preps or having these supplies put back gives you options in a situation or a scenario. Now, let's circle back to where I started with, having these items, being proactive to handle or better handle situations, that are emergencies and being prepared for them. A lot of the channels that you watch, they show these, big, and even mine, you'll see I have a water filtration system that I put together. It's DIY. I have a little bit of money invested into it, but it wasn't overly hateful compared to what an osmosis system would cost you. Or I have a generator, in the shed that I can wheel out. It doesn't power the whole house. In fact, if I put too much draw on it, it starts to damage things. A couple of years ago, we had a tornado come through, and I had to use it for about a day and a half, maybe 2 days. The more draw that I put on the generator, the more fuel it just drinks. I mean, it only holds a gallon, and it seems like I'm constantly out there filling it up because I got so much running off of it. But the downside to that was my HVAC system wasn't receiving enough juice, and it damaged a part in my furnace, which I had to get a repair guy out. I was unaware that, not having enough wattage to run everything could possibly damage something. It wasn't something I was aware of. I hooked the generator up and we got the lights on and the refrigerator's on, and we didn't do laundry. I didn't use the stove, common sense here. I used the grill outside for cooking. It was only a day and a half. We didn't run the dryer. But the HVAC system was running, and it damaged it. A week or so later, it started giving me issues, and the repair guy said, the relay here, either just was old and died, or there was a voltage problem, maybe a surge or not enough. And I'm thinking to myself, hey, a week ago I had the generator plugged in, and maybe there just wasn't enough juice to do everything I was trying to do. So, having one of those, big fancy, quite expensive, solar battery generators, they're great if you can afford them. And I'm not really one that can. It's one of those things that's on the list, but it's so far down the list that if I get to it, great. But I got other priorities that I got to put my money towards. I can make do with, a gas generator that I bought from Home Depot 12 years ago. It still works. It does the job. And it's probably time for an upgrade or a new one. It still works. It coughs a little bit. Maybe it needs a carburetor. I don't know. I've tinkered with it. I've tried cleaning it. It doesn't stabilize at idle, and I don't know enough about it. And I tried looking up a replacement, and they don't make it anymore, of course. So for the sake of a carburetor, I almost have to buy a new generator. It drives me nuts. I hear good things about the Harbor Freight Predator series. So when that time comes, I'll probably look into that. But for now, I will run what I brung. I will use what I have and just not run as much on it. My priorities are the freezers and the refrigerators. I want to extend my food, for as long as I can. I've been down that road where I lost an entire refrigerator full of food, and it's not fun. It sucks to have to go to the grocery store and buy all that stuff again. So, having, things like, some food put back that I can cook on the grill. I have a grill, propane grill outside. Most people do. Mine is actually the dual propane on one side and charcoal on the other. So I can use both. And I keep charcoal and I keep, propane, and I keep a couple extra bottles of the propane on hand. I have one on the grill, and then I believe 2 or 3 in the garage that, just are kind of like backups to where if something should happen, at least I could use the grill for months. The propane lasts almost an entire season, depending on how much grilling I'm doing. So, but aside from all that, I think the point I want to try to make here for everyone is you don't have to have really deep pockets to start to prepare yourself, being proactive to handle, situations, and whether it be something as simple as, a storm knocks the power out for a few hours, or, the zombie apocalypse, from one extreme to the other. So I put a list together here of, things that I feel are of most important, or at least very important. No particular order to the list. And I know I've seen this list on other channels, and basically they're all the same, but they tend to show you all these, super huge, way out of reach answers to a problem that, really can be solved with simplicity. First on the list is water. If you're on a well system like I am and the power goes out, I don't need these on, then water is an issue. If you're in a city or a metropolitan area, chances are you have municipal water, to where if the power does go out, 9 times out of 10, your water still works. I lived in Baltimore for a lot of years of my life, and when the power would go out, the water still worked because it was municipal. Now, a major incident could probably cause the water to go out, and anytime there is some sort of incident, usually the authorities tell you, there's a boil order. Don't drink the water, boil it first. And most people have been through all that, but something simple as water, and it could be just cases of water. I didn't bring out a whole case, but I did bring out a few things just to show you, some of the examples that I have. I don't even know if I have an entire case of this. I generally don't store cases of bottled water. I have maybe 10 or 15 bottles, miscellaneous, in my little storage area that I mostly use for hiking and backpacking. Smart Water is a good one. It has a pop top. These were probably on sale at the grocery store, and I picked them up. I think there's a few of these back there. But having some bottled water, even if you have a closet or under your bed. You know, you can get a couple of cases of bottled water, and that'll get you through for a while. They say a gallon of water per day per person. So that's a lot more than you think. And that includes for drinking, for cooking, for washing, for bathing, for sanitary, you know, flushing the toilet. You know, so you need a fair amount of water when, you know, there's an issue and you're not able to access water as you normally would. So having a few cases of bottled water, you know, stacked away in a closet or, you know, in a corner of a room or under the bed or something. Another option is the 5-gallon jugs, such as these. You've seen these at the grocery store and Walmart and, you know, half the other stores. You can get them refilled. This is just an empty one. I have a service that, you know, comes to the house and drops these off full and picks up the empties, you know, once a month. And then we have the water cooler in the kitchen because I'm on a well. It's not the best tasting water. So we have a dispenser in the kitchen that, you know, this sits in on the top. You've seen them in offices and whatnot, and you pull the spout and the water comes out. It is hot and cold when you plug it in, but if you unplug it and there's no power, the water still comes out. It just comes out room temperature. So that's a good thing. I can still access water. And these are great. They store pretty well. They don't stack well. You know, they stack on their side, you know, better. You can build them up like a pyramid or just sit them flat. I keep them, you know, in the garage, just sitting flat on the floor. And then I have a small rack that holds, I think, 6 of them. But I keep, strangely, I keep about 20 of these. So that's about 100 gallons. These are 5 gallons each, and I keep 20 on hand at all time. Now, I didn't buy all 20 at once. I had the service over about a year period add 1 bottle to my delivery. So instead of me using 4 bottles per month and then taking 4 empties and bringing me 4 full ones for the next month, I added an extra bottle on so I would have 1 that would not get used. And that went on for about a year until I built up, or maybe a year and a half. It was a while until I built up a stash of them, basically. And the delivery guy sees it, and he, you know, him and I talked about it. He knows why I did it. And he's like, that's smart. You know, it doesn't cost you much because it's only an extra bottle a month. And, you know, here we are, you know, a year and a half later, you got a supply of water. And it really wasn't hateful for me to, you know, have to, you know, put out a bunch of money, you know, at one time. It was just a little here, a little there. And it worked out for me. And that's what worked in my situation. So, you know, I certainly would suggest, you know, doing whatever works out, you know, best in your situation. If you can pick up, you know, an extra case of water once a month at the grocery store or Walmart, you know, and stash it in the closet, you know, at least you'll have it to where, you know, when you need it, it's there. Or if one of your neighbors needs it or one of your loved ones, you know, and that pretty much covers water, you know, without getting into, you know, the hand pumps on the well and water rain catchment systems and all the big drums and all the stuff that, you know, a lot of the, you know, the channel content creators, the preppers, you know, they're showing you all these drums and all this and these big IBC tanks. And that's great if you have the space and the money. But if you don't, just a couple of cases of bottled water gets the job done. So, you know, keep it simple. What's the saying? KISS, KISS, keep it simple, stupid. You know, so I try not to overcomplicate things. And I really want to stress that, you know, on my channel, at least. You know, I love the content from all the other creators and I value it and I watch it. And I do a lot of the stuff that they put on those channels. But, you know, I didn't just start doing this. I may have just started this channel, but I didn't just start being prepared for situations. This has kind of been a hobby of mine, you know, this preparedness outdoors thing my entire life. I've always had, you know, extras of stuff and redundancy and backup to my backups to my backups. And you know, just something I've always done. I guess I got it from my grandparents because they were kind of that way, you know, the greatest generation. The second thing on the list is food. Food doesn't have to be complicated. I know I see a lot online scrolling the social media and you know, watching the YouTube channels where they show the buckets of the survival food and you know, you get 90 days for $400 or $600 or whatever, or, you know, the freeze dried, and that's all great. And I have that stuff, you know. It's taken me a long time to be able to afford to get some of that, you know, because that stuff's expensive. And not only do I have to feed myself and my family every week, but I got to put a little aside to build up that cachet or that supply of things that I can fall back on when it's required. But for the most part, every week you go to the grocery store, if you buy $3 to $5 worth of extra stuff, whether it be, you know, a couple cans of some soup or some green beans or some Chef Boyardee or some beef stew, it adds up. You put a couple extra cans a week in your pantry. When you run out of space in your pantry, you pick another spot under a bed, behind a couch, and it doesn't take long, a few weeks, couple of months down the road, and you have a week's worth of food. You end up with 12 cans of soup. You know, now I think I've seen this on the grocery store, the chunky soup. It doesn't need to be heated or cooked. It's just got a pop top. You open the can, you can literally eat it right out the can. It won't hurt you. It probably tastes much better when you warm it up. But in a pinch, you can literally eat it right out of the can, as with all of this. And I'm sure it all tastes a little bit better when you do heat it up. You know, nothing beats a hot meal. But essentially, you don't have to boil water. You don't have to rehydrate anything. You just pop the top and eat it right out of the can and then throw the can away. But I've seen these at the grocery store, like 2 for $4, maybe 2 for $3. You catch them on sale for the soups. And it doesn't have to be chunky. It could be any, you know, Campbell's or store brand or whatever, just, you know, some sort of soup. Same with the Chef Boyardee. In fact, I picked these up just a few weeks ago at my local grocery store. They had them in the bargain bin. They're not expired yet, but I think the end of this year or maybe next year is when they expire. Yes, they expire in December of 2026. So they still got a lot of shelf life. And I'll tell you, with the technology that's used nowadays, with the lining in the can and the temperatures and the pressure, kept in the right environment, in the right circumstances, you know, a cool, dark place, no humidity, no moisture, these will last just about a lifetime. You know, it says best buy, not throw away at. So it's best by December of 2026, but that doesn't mean it's not edible. It may taste a little weird. It may not have the nutritional value, but we're talking Chef Boyardee here. How much nutritional value do you think could be in this can? But in a pinch, it has a pop top. You open the top, you can eat it right out of the can. And I'm pretty sure that there's people out there, I know there's Gen Xers out there, that they do that on purpose. They eat it cold right out of the can because we did it when we were kids. You know, and it's just something that we do. But, you know, Chef Boyardee, beef stew, you know, the Denny Moore, I have some of this. I know, you know, there's a couple of channels out there where they rave about this, and it's not bad. You know, it's not like grandma's homemade beef stew, I'll tell you that. But in a pinch, it has a pop top. You know, you pop the top, you eat it right out of the can, or you can heat it up with, you know, your choice if you have the resources to, you know, warm it up. But again, you know, it's right out of the can, same technology that, you know, everything, you know, it'll last almost forever. It's almost indefinite. I'm not sure what the best by date is on this can. We will take a look. Best by, this is March of 2026. I've had this for a little bit. It's been on the shelf a while. I rarely see this, you know, go on sale. But when I do, I try to pick it up, or you know, if I don't see anything that entices me on sale, I'll grab a can or whatever just to have it. But I don't have a lot of this, but I do have some. And then there's like canned meats, like tuna and chicken and salmon and Spam and, you know, all those other type of things you can catch on sale. You know, green beans, you know, I see these for as cheap as 90 cents or $1 a can when you catch them on sale. Normal price can be pricey, but stuff always goes on sale. This happens to be Green Giant. but there are, no shortage of other brands as well as store brands that, would cost you a little bit less. This, unfortunately, doesn't have a pop top. You got to do the old school can opener thing. But this, again, you can eat right out of the can if you had to. So that about covers food. It doesn't have to be complicated. And remember, you're trying to be proactive to a situation and not reactive to a situation. So having something is better than having nothing. Even if it's just some Chef Boyardee or some Denny Moore beef stew, it's better than having nothing. So that covers food. All right. Number 3 on my list. And again, these are in no specific order of importance. I think they're all equally important. I just sat down the other day and jotted down a list of what I thought were, some important things to focus on when preparing for, situations or emergencies. And you can take it from there. When it comes to amounts of this kind of stuff, start small. Start with putting together a 3-day supply of everything on the list. And I'll post the list down in the description or pin it to the comments or something. But it's just a simple piece of paper that I wrote a list on. Nothing fancy. Number 3 on my list is, it's a combination of things because I kind of wrap them all up together, is fuel, batteries, and fire. In a situation where the power's out, for example, and that's kind of where I'm leaning here, having batteries for your flashlights or for your lanterns. Sorry, while I pull some of this stuff over to you so you can see it. This you've seen in multiple videos. I have a ton of these. I get them at Harbor Freight. I don't remember how much they are. They're pretty cheap. They take AA batteries down here at the bottom. You just pull them open, and it's a lantern. They're super bright. You can just carry it around, or you could hook it on something. And then, of course, flashlights. They're always good. I am not a huge fan of rechargeable stuff. Merely because you can't just throw a battery in it and it work again. You have to recharge it, meaning you need a bigger piece of equipment to provide power to your smaller piece of equipment. So, my EDC flashlight takes AAA batteries, my lanterns and other flashlights. This lantern here, it normally lives with my camping gear. It takes D batteries. So I do keep some D batteries on hand, but, it's just a simple lantern. So you want to have batteries, or at least a supply, and one of those fancy battery buddy organizer things. That'd be great. I don't have one. It's never been a super priority. This is just a bin. I get these at the dollar store, and, I throw a few packs of batteries in it. Just for, and I have, I think, 2 or 3 of these bins around the house. This is just the one that was in my camping gear because I went and got the lantern. I figured, let's grab the batteries as well. But I keep these upstairs in a closet in a bin similar to this. Maybe it's a little bigger. I don't remember. But I keep an assortment of batteries around, for the purpose of when I need a lantern or a flashlight or something that requires batteries, maybe a small radio. I have a stash of batteries, and for instance, my EDC flashlight. This is just a little Amazon light that I got. I think it was a 5-pack off Amazon for about $20. They were pretty cheap. I break the clips a lot because they live in my pocket. I work construction. This one I've actually put some Gorilla Tape around to try to hold the clip on because I lose the clips a lot. This flashlight itself takes 2 AAA batteries. I keep an assortment of AAAs and AAs, and it lasts me probably about a month and a half or 2 months. So maybe 6 or 8 times a year I have to change the batteries. So when I do get batteries, in fact, these are from Harbor Freight. I can tell by the, I think these are from Harbor Freight. Not sure. These are some off-brand of AAs here that were probably fairly cheap. Here's another pack of, these are definitely from Harbor Freight. These are more AAs. These are for the, this being in the camping gear, these batteries are mainly for these lanterns. I have a handful of these, you know, for the tents, and you know, I think I got 6 or 8 of them. There's a bunch of them. Yeah, so I keep an assortment of batteries, and my other box of batteries upstairs also has, you know, double A's and triple A's, and I'm pretty sure that one up there has D cell and C cell and 9 volts, you know, for the smoke detectors, and you know, the utility closet has an old school big 5 or 6D mag light, you know, the thing that's like a baseball bat. It's huge. I still have one of those. It's upstairs in the utility closet, and it, you know, takes, you know, 6D batteries or whatever it is. So I keep those up there. But, you know, you have to have an assortment of batteries if you're not going to go with the rechargeable route. You know, I'm not a big fan of that, merely because, you know, there's so many things in our world today that require recharging, the phones and the earbuds and all that. Just to me, it gets a little bit overwhelming. I do have battery packs for, you know, charging banks or power banks or whatever they're called. I have 2 or 3 of those. I don't remember the brands. One I know is a jump box, you know, like you keep in your car, and that's where I keep it. I keep it in my truck. It has USB connections on the side, so I could recharge my phone or, you know, some sort of device that requires recharging, but then I got to charge the power bank. I keep it in the car for emergencies if my battery dies, and I got it because it has little mini jumper cables. I can hook it to the battery and start the truck, and that's why I keep it in there. But I have a few of the smaller, you know, battery banks that I've stumbled across, and they work. You know, the wife takes them with her when she travels for work. You know, if she's on a plane watching a movie on her phone and her phone starts to die, she plugs in the little power bank. So that works out great. But as far as how I view the preparedness side of it, I prefer to lean towards, you know, battery powered lanterns. You know, I have a couple of camp stoves, you know, the little 2-burner Coleman camp stoves, one of which takes the bottles like this. I have a lantern that screws on here, you know, the camping lantern that screws on these bottles. And, you know, I keep these bottles around. In fact, you know, the good thing about these, and, you know, you buy these at Walmart or, you know, outdoor stores, you can buy an adapter to go on here, and you can actually refill these from your 20-gallon or larger propane bottle, like for your grill. So, you know, you don't have to just use them and then chuck them and buy a new one. You can actually refill them, and that's super convenient. I also have the old school Coleman lanterns, and the Coleman. In fact, the Coleman stove that I use the most when I'm camping is the one that takes the fuel. It's you know, dual fuel. It uses Coleman fuel and white gas, camp fuel, which it looks like this. Sometimes Coleman, you know, I don't know, this is a different brand, but it's a camp stove fuel. Looks like this. They're around $20 a gallon. You know, I think I keep 3 or 4 of these on hand. You know, they're sealed. They last a good long time, providing the can doesn't get rusty. And I use it in my 2-burner stove when I'm camping. And I also have lanterns. I don't use them very often. In fact, I haven't used them in quite a few years, but I also have lanterns, you know, that I can put that fuel in and make light. But that's primarily for my 2-burner stove. So in a situation where I lose power, I have 2 options, which, again, why do we do this? So we have options. When the power goes out and I need to cook something, whether it's make a cup of coffee or cook a meal, I have 2 options. I can use the grill. Actually, I have more than 2 options. I have 2 easy access options. I can use my propane grill, or I can use my camp stove. Now, my grill not only is propane, but it's also charcoal. It has a charcoal side. And back during the Hurricane Helene, I think it was, I remember seeing on Facebook one of my cousins who lives down in the region in South Carolina. They had lost electricity and they didn't have a grill. And I saw where an uncle of mine, who is a boomer, he's one of the early boomers, so he's right at the cusp of greatest generation and boom. But anyway, my uncle commented, you know, And it was a fantastic idea that I never would have thought of. And he said, take the rack out of your oven and put it on some blocks in the backyard and light a fire underneath, and you can boil water or you can make food. You can build your own campfire grill, basically, with the rack that's in your oven. You know, we all have those metal racks in our ovens. You take the rack out of your oven, you put it on some blocks or something, you know, to get it up off the ground. You build a fire underneath of it, and boom, you're cooking. That's ingenious. And that's just, I never would have thought of that. You know, I thought it was great. I'm like, mental note. I'm going to have to remember that. So, you know, so that's another option for me. But my two main options for cooking when I lose electricity would be my camp stove or my grill outside. Now, I have seen, and there's a bunch of videos around, and I've seen them at Walmart, the little single burner, it's one burner stove that takes the can of butane. I don't have one, but that's a great little idea. I don't know if they're safe to use indoors. I would certainly research it before I purchased it. My camp stove, I don't think it's safe to use indoors. I mean, it burns fuel. I know it makes fumes. I've never used it anywhere but outside. When I have had to use it, not camping, just when my power goes out, I put it on the deck, you know, outside, just sitting on the table, and I open it up and I crank it up and I put my pots on it and I cook whatever I need to cook. It's pretty simple, pretty easy to use. Surprisingly, to buy them new, they're still kind of pricey. I looked at them just to see what they were going for, and there was a couple out there that were, but I see them on the Facebook Marketplace all the time. In fact, I just saw somebody had put up on the marketplace. They were selling, you know, a bunch of camping gear that was their uncles or their fathers or something, and they were selling the whole lot of camping gear, all of it, for $50 or something like that, or $25. And it was a stove, it was a lantern, it was plates and forks and cups, and you know, it was a whole bunch of stuff. And if I didn't already have bins full of stuff, I'd have went and bought it just to have it. So, you know, you always have to watch, you know, the marketplace or Craigslist or any of these, you know, used resources, because people are always selling that kind of stuff. And I know I see the Coleman stoves, you know, the one like mine that takes the fuel, as well as the second one that I have that takes the little gas bottles that you screw in, and it has two burners. I've seen those, you know, on Facebook Marketplace for, you know, $20, $25, and that's dirt cheap. You can't argue with that. It'll save you in a pinch, and you know, store it away. It never goes bad. So that covers fuel and batteries. And the last thing I want to talk about is fire. If you have to light the grill, or you have to light a fire because you used your oven rack to make something outside, it's always good to have simple things. Now, you can get the ferro rod or the flint and steel, and you can learn the bushcraft techniques on how to start fire from, you know, literally nothing. And those are great skills to have. If you're out and you need to light a fire and it's raining and everything's wet and you can actually make fire, that is a magnificent skill to have. But in most situations, we're home, the power's gone out, and we just want to make a cup of coffee. So we need to light the grill. Having some cigarette lighters, or, you know, I have the long stormproof, you know, long burning matches, and, you know, but I grabbed this specifically for the fact that these are generally free. Most stores, like a convenience store or a liquor store that sells cigarettes or cigars, you know, they always have matches, or the majority of the time. If you purchase those types of things, you know, cigarettes or cigars, they generally ask you, do you need some matches? Oh, no, thanks. I have a lighter. If you don't smoke, which, great, smoking's definitely not good for you. But you can also go in the store and say, you know, hey, do you have a pack of matches? Yeah, sure. Here you go. How many you need? And they'll give you a handful of them. They're free. Or you can buy the wooden matches. These are just the old school, you know, cardboard, paper type with the striker. That's really all you need. You drop a couple of packs down in a Ziploc bag or put them in a kitchen drawer. And I mean, they last forever, I think. I don't know how long I've had this pack. In fact, I ended up, you know, having a couple of books. These come in a small box. I don't know how many packs are in a box, but there's a boatload of them, and they call it a book of matches. And when my father passed away years ago, he had a couple of them in his house. I found them in a drawer. There was 3 or 4 books of matches, and I stuck them down in a food saver bag and sealed them up and threw them in a bin for my camping gear. And I don't think I've ever even opened them. So I have a boatload of matches that I'm not even sure if I'll ever use, but I also keep lighters around. I keep them in the kitchen drawer. I think there's one in the bathroom drawer. The wife uses it for lighting the candles in the house, the smelly candles and whatnot. So there's no shortage of lighters around. And then they make a lighter. You can get it at dollar stores. It's about that long. It's a little more safe to use to like put down in the grill and light the charcoal, and, because it's longer, and they're fairly easy to get, but ultimately you can go get some free matches and do the same thing. So, you don't have to spend a lot of money to start this journey or to take this journey into preparedness, because so far everything I've shown you, you can do on the cheap. And that's with everything. There's only a couple of things that tend to get expensive, but those are further down the list. We'll get to those. Talking about the batteries and the fire and the fuel, that brings us to number 4. Number 4 is light. Now, flashlights, lanterns, when the power goes out and it's dark, it's dark. I know where I live, when the power goes out, it's dark. It's dark in the house. It's dark in the yard. And I'm not, like the dog and can see in the dark. So I need to have flashlights and lanterns. But something that is pretty simple is, which I won't bring it all, candles. Candles are usually pretty cheap. If not free, you can pick them up at yard sales, flea markets. You see them on the marketplace. You can buy them in stores fairly inexpensively, but candles are great. You light the wick. It makes a flame. It makes light. It's a wonderful thing. Obviously, you have to be careful with open flame in the house. You don't want to catch your curtains or anything on fire. I keep a plate, and I've talked about these candles before. I've had these for years. I keep this old plate, this platter plate thing that I have. I just keep it down the basement on a shelf, that when my power goes out, I use my EDC flashlight or one of the flashlights I have stashed around upstairs and work my way down the basement. I get the candles off the shelf. I carry it back upstairs. I light each candle. I stick it on the kitchen island, and it lights up basically the kitchen and part of the dining room and part of another room. These 3 candles make almost enough light to light the entire first floor of my house. So, which is not very big. So you'd be surprised how a little bit of light goes a long way. And you don't have to buy the rechargeable solar lanterns and, all the fancy stuff. Just a simple, $3 or $2 flashlight does the job, and, a couple bucks worth of candles and a free pack of matches. And, now you have light. So that's really not complicated. Light's one of those things that, is pretty simple when you think about it. It's nice having all that other stuff. It does make life a little easier, more convenient when you can click on a lantern and it's well lit, or open up a lantern and carry it around the house. But ultimately, a couple of candles and a tiny flashlight does the job. You can find your way around in the dark. You're not fumbling around, falling over stuff or stumping your toe or whatever. So that covers light. That brings us to number 5. Number 5 is also a combined category because it's kind of like 2 things. Number 5 is hygiene, which I only brought out one because I just did a big 30-minute video on hygiene. So I wasn't going to drag all that stuff back out again. So I grabbed the hand sanitizer out the bathroom. When there's a situation where the water isn't, you're using your stored water and there's no power, the last thing you want is to cause the situation to go from bad to worse, meaning norovirus or the stomach bug, or, not washing your hands and, getting getting yourself sick due to lack of cleanliness. So something as simple as some hand sanitizer. You know, these come from the dollar store. I think they're $1 at the dollar store. You know, I keep several of these. I take them camping. We have them in the kitchen. We have them in the bathroom. You know, they're fairly inexpensive to buy, and they last a good while. You know, after you wash your hands, you get a double shot of, you know, just get a shot of some hand sanitizer, and now your hands are definitely clean. So hand sanitizer is a good way to go. And there's a lot of other items in hygiene, you know, mouthwash and Listerine and soap. And, you know, you have to think about all that stuff. But generally, we have that stuff available to us in our house to begin with. So it's always good to have a little bit of redundancy, maybe a couple extra bars of soap or an extra bottle of, excuse me, mouthwash. You know, a couple extra bottles of hand sanitizer. You know, that goes a long way. You know, and that pretty much will handle your hygiene, you know, toothpaste, you know, normal stuff, alcohol, peroxide. Normally, we all have that stuff in our house to begin with. So, you know, having a little bit extra, I know peroxide, alcohol, I've bought that at the dollar store for $1. It's fairly inexpensive at Walmart, the grocery store, probably Target. You know, again, $3 to $5 a week. You know, it only adds up to, you know, $12 to $20 a month. That's like 2 cups of Starbucks coffee. I mean, I don't drink Starbucks. I make coffee at home because it's cheaper. But for what some people pay for 2 or 3 cups of coffee a week at Starbucks, you could have all this. You know, it isn't that much, but a little goes a long way. You get what I'm trying to say. Now, as far as cleaning, not only do you want to keep yourself clean, but you want to try to keep your surfaces clean. This is a simple, effective way to do it. These, you know, most people have these. If not, they have a cleaner they can put in a bucket with some water and a rag, you know, like Grandma used. I think Mr. Clean was her favorite. You know, so the house always smelled either like Pine Sol or like Mr. Clean. In fact, I still use Pine Sol because it reminds me of, you know, Grandma's house, you know, because it smelled like Pine Sol. But, you know, for convenience, we do keep these around. You know, they come in like a 4 or 5 pack of these at Walmart or Costco or wherever we get them. I don't remember, you know, but they're fairly inexpensive. They get the job done. And more so, it's the convenience of, you know, just having the wipe. You can grab, you can wipe something down, you throw it away. But ultimately, it isn't a necessity. You know, you can buy a gallon of bleach for, you know, $1 or $2, and that does the same thing. Or you can get some Pine Sol or some Mr. Clean, you know, any type of cleaner, some Lysol. I think I even have some of the Lysol, like the lemon scented Lysol disinfectant, you know, cleaner that you just add to water and, you know, you can wipe stuff down. But, you know, I grabbed these because, you know, they were just very easy to grab and I could use them for the video. So, but again, you don't have to buy these, you know, fancy wipes. You can do other things, you know, like I've shown with some of these other examples, as far as, you know, keep it simple. And a gallon of bleach and some water and a rag does the same thing. It'll keep your surfaces clean. And that's really what you want to try to do in a situation where, you know, it may not be easy to get medical attention, or the last thing you want to do is get a stomach bug when the power's out and now you're down laying, you can't stop throwing up, you're getting dehydrated, or you got diarrhea, life is just miserable, all because, you know, you didn't wipe off the sink surface after you accidentally spilled your can of Dinty Moore beef stew or whatever the reason may be. But again, so that covers, you know, number 5 on our list, which is, you know, hygiene and cleaning, which brings me to, which I almost wrapped this up with the category of hygiene and cleaning, but I decided to make it its own because it can be a little more than just what I have here. So number 6 on the list is medical. Now, medical doesn't have to be overly complicated unless it's necessary. Now, if you or someone in your family, you know, requires medications on a daily basis, then I would certainly talk to your doctor about getting an additional, you know, supply. Maybe they'll give you a 30-day supply. I know there's companies out there I heard of one the other day, Jace Medical, JACE, I think is how it was spelled. But there's companies out there that will work with you on, helping you build a supply, extra 30 days or 45 days or something. I don't think it's much, but we're talking medications here. You don't want to buy 6 months worth because they don't work as well. They go bad. But you definitely want to have at least 30 days of any type of medications. Over-the-counter stuff is fairly easy. An extra bottle of Advil or some Tylenol, some Tums, or some sort of antacid. I keep that stuff around in the medicine cabinet, and I keep some on the shelf. I have a whole shelf down here in the basement with cleaners and hygiene and medical stuff. It's a whole shelf unit. So when I need Advil, I know I have one of the larger bottles. I get them at Costco. I think they're about $12 or $18 or something. They're not cheap, but they're not overly expensive. And I think it's 500 in a bottle. And then the little bottle that I got at CVS or wherever I got it, I just refill that and stick it back in the medicine cabinet upstairs. Because at the grocery store, the tiny little bottle of 50 or 30 tablets, it's like $8, as opposed to the big bottle at Costco or Walmart with 500 tablets is twice that, but it's 10 times the amount of medication. So that's kind of how I do it. Same with alcohol or peroxide. You've seen this stuff. I just did a hygiene video recently, and some of this stuff I hadn't even put away yet. But aside from any medications that you would require or anyone in your household would require, you got to think. You hear people or channels on the internet talking about, these trauma kits and tourniquets and that stuff is all good to have, if you know how to use it. And I have that stuff. I have had some training on, emergency type situations like that, trauma, but when we're talking a power goes out at your house, you might cut your finger. You might, stretch. You're not going to need blood clotting bandages for bullet wounds, or tourniquets for severe lash. Generally you're going to need to wash the cut and put a Band-Aid on it. It's good to have some of that stuff, but it's not necessary. Having something as simple as a first aid kit with just a few. In fact, I've robbed half of this out of here and put it in another first aid kit. But having some antiseptic wipes and this is an emergency blanket, some Band-Aids, some gauze, some medical tape for the gauze. Here's some anti-itch cream that I'm not sure why, but it was on the counter upstairs. Someone left it out, didn't put it away, so I grabbed it on my way down here to do this. Some but having some like Neosporin or one of those type, little ointments you can put on, or, having that stuff is fairly inexpensive. Pack of Band-Aids, I think I got these. This is 30 Band-Aids. And I remember specifically getting these. They were $1 a pack at the grocery store. I couldn't believe it. I was like, $1 for a pack. I think I bought 5 packs of Band-Aids, and there's 30 in the box. They were $1. That was a good score. So if you're just going to run out and start buying everything here, it's going to be expensive. But if you keep your eye out, and you're walking around the store and you're getting your milk and your bread and your eggs and, all the stuff that you would normally buy, and you walk by and you say, oh, look, Band-Aids for $1 a box. Well, there's your $3 to $5 that week of extra put back supplies. So, and this first aid kit, as most, has little, single packs of ointments, and, this is triple antiseptic ointment. This is first aid and burn cream. What else is in here? This is little hand sanitizer packs. Most first aid kits. Here's a pair of gloves. You definitely want to have something like that if you're dealing with injuries. But ultimately, some Band-Aids and some alcohol, it doesn't break the bank, and it'll do the job in a pinch, as with most first aid kits. So that covers, and that's really why I separated medical from hygiene and cleaning, is because it adds those medications You can go as severe as the tourniquets and the IFAC kits and all, but that stuff's expensive. And ultimately, there's little chance. The percentage of you ever needing to use that is pretty small. Good to have. And like I said, I have them, but it's not, absolutely necessary in a situation, because remember, we're trying to be proactive about situations and not reactive. If we're in a situation where the power goes out and we're fumbling around at night because the dog barked at something and we knocked the candle that's not lit because we blew the candle out before we went to bed, we knocked the candle off the counter and the glass broke and we stepped on the glass because the dog was barking at a squirrel or something, and now you're fumbling around and you can't find a Band-Aid, or, now you're wadding up toilet paper, packing it on there, wrapping it with duct tape or something. So, not that any of that is bad. And, I've done that. I've rubbed dirt on it and wrapped it with, usually at work. Before I started keeping a first aid kit in my truck, I've done dumb shit like that. Pour a little bottled water on it, wipe it off on my pants, wrap it with some duct tape and go back to work. I've done that stuff. But it doesn't take much to have a small first aid kit. They're fairly inexpensive to buy. I know Walmart carries them. Most drugstores like CVS or Walgreens, I know they have, small first aid kits. And if you don't want to go that route, then you can just get some Band-Aids or some gauze and some alcohol or some peroxide, and it all does the same job. So that covers we're almost through this list already. That covers number 6. That covers medical and medications. And now the next thing is the one thing on the list that can get pricey. And I see a lot of videos where they throw out all of this gear and say, this is what you need. This is what you need. And ultimately, that's not 100% true. It's not what you need. The next thing is number 7, and that is security. As much as we don't want to believe it or to think that it could happen, there are individuals out there that when there's a power outage or a situation that, has people away from their daily routine, they see it as an opportunity. I know I read in a book, and you've seen me talk about this book, where there was a situation where the electricity was out and people were using their generators and they were leaving their generators run through the night. Well, there were some individuals that were buying the junkiest, crappiest lawnmower they could find on the internet, or stealing it, taking it to the location where people were using a generator, starting the lawnmower, turning off the generator, loading the generator in their truck, and leaving. Now, stolen lawnmower, homeowner, in-house, here's motor running. My power's out, but my generator's still running. By the time they get their flashlight and go out there to see what's going on, perpetrator is long gone. So, security. I think one of the best methods of security is a dog. Not everyone could have a dog. Their hearing, their vision, their instinct is a little bit better than ours. And when they sense something not right, they bark. Usually a dog barking is enough to cause an individual that's up to nefarious acts to decide to move on, because they hear a dog barking. Now, if it's a bigger dog, with a deeper bark, they might move on a little faster. But in a sense, even if it's a small dog, a dog that barks is usually enough to deter any type of situation. So having a dog, is a measure of security. Having lights to where if you hear a noise, you can turn on the lantern, you can turn on the flashlight. That's a deterrent. Another example of a deterrent in security is going to be a firearm. Now, that can open a can of worms and as to what's the best, and I don't have that answer. I know I have several firearms. It's been a hobby of mine since I was young. I personally feel that for home defense, I feel that nothing beats the 12 gauge shotgun. Now, this is just a standard pump 12 gauge Remington 870. I removed the long, 26-inch barrel, I think is what came on it stock, and put a shorter 20-inch barrel on for home defense. You can buy these set up this way. It has a magazine extender. I know if you're hunting, there's a limit as to the capacity of your magazine, but I believe this magazine holds 2 from the factory, and then I have the extender on it that adds 2 more. So I believe it holds 5 total, 1 in the chamber and 4 in the magazine, or 5 in the magazine, or something like that. It's certainly less than what the state requirement is. The state requirement for me is 10. This is far less than that. But in the end, just that noise, that's usually enough to deter someone. So if you can manufacture that noise without buying a firearm, hey, that's a good thing. But in my opinion, a shotgun is a great. You don't have to aim it; you just point it. They're loud, they're powerful, very dangerous. I would suggest taking some safety courses and getting some experience. If you're not an enthusiast of firearms, I would certainly suggest getting some training. You don't want to go into the firearms world without some training and some experience and some education, some knowledge, because they can be very dangerous. I tell people all the time that are new to firearms and shooting that this is one of the things you can't take back. Once that projectile leaves this barrel, you can't take it back. And that's important to know, that it could end someone's life. But 9 times out of 10, just that sound is enough to cause any jackwagon trying to or thinking about a nefarious act for them to hightail it away, because that's like a universal don't even try it sound. So again, whatever you're comfortable with, I'm not saying that firearms are necessary, and I know there's a ton of channels out there that they show you the plate carriers and the chest rigs and the ARs and the helmets with the night vision and the if you notice, mine doesn't even have a flashlight on it. I don't feel it's necessary for a flashlight. I'm not doing CQB, so it's not something that I need to put my money into. In fact, it could be argued that the shotgun is not the best for home defense that a pistol is. An auto pistol or a revolver, depending on what you're comfortable with. This is my carry pistol. It does stay in a lockbox, when I'm sleeping. So I could, if I chose to, grab the pistol. And again, you see, mine doesn't have a light on it. I just don't get into that kind of stuff. In fact, none of my weapons have lights on them. If I need to use, I'm capable, and I have this ability to, have a light and my weapon, because you come around the corner and here's a scenario. If there is someone in your house and they have a firearm and they see a light, there's a good chance they're going to shoot at the light. Well, if I'm holding the firearm in front of me and the light is attached to the firearm, they're going to shoot at the light. But if I know someone's in my house and I have to go around the corner, I'm going to hold the light up here. I'm still blinding them, but now they're shooting at the light way up here. Ever thought about that? So I don't know, if it's a thing, but it's something that I thought about, that, if it were me, I would probably shoot at the light out of fear. So you have to assume that, somebody, up to no good would probably think the same thing. But again, firearms are one of those things that you need training, you need education and practice, and it's not something you can just dive right into unless you're comfortable with it. And then I would still suggest and recommend getting the training, and and there's a cajillion different firearms on the market that you can choose from. These are just two that I grabbed because they're my primary home defense. My carry pistol that is what I carry, and then the shotgun, which is home defense. And you notice there isn't even any rounds in it. I keep it completely unloaded, and there's no rounds in the strap here. I don't feel it's necessary. I do have them locked in the safe upstairs. If I was to need to grab this, I would grab it. It loads pretty quickly from underneath. If you have this kind of weapon, you'll know that they load pretty quickly from underneath. But again, 99 out of 100 times, just that noise is all it takes for someone to change their mind, as far as a nefarious act or anything that would danger you or your family's life. So that covers number 7, security. But again, the dog, you can't beat that. My dog is going to alert me long before I hear something in the house. I'll hear the door getting kicked in, or I'll hear the window breaking, but she'll hear somebody coming. The footsteps are, I don't know, their hearing is just way better than ours. So she barks at squirrels in the middle of the night. So how she hears them, I have no idea. But and then lights, of course, being able to turn on if you have floodlights that hook to a battery powered generator or something along those lines, you can turn on your floodlights, or you have solar powered lights outside of your house that you can turn on and off when you need to. That's great. Obviously you're not going to be able to flick a switch and turn your yard lighting on if there's no power. But having flashlights, or, I have the big 5 or 6D mag light, old school. I mean, that thing throws a beam across the yard like you wouldn't believe. It's heavy. I could use it as a weapon if I had to, but it's super bright. And that I do change the batteries out 3 or 4 times a year, because the lantern in the camping lantern also uses D batteries. So I buy new ones. I put them in the flashlight. I take the ones from the flashlight out, put them in the lantern, just so there's always new batteries in the flashlight. And the ones in the lantern, if they die, I'm camping. I'll just grab another set out of the box and put it in there. So that brings me to the last thing. I don't know how long I've been rambling on here, talking to you guys. I hope you're getting something from this. But the last thing is something a little nicer than security or, all these other topics. It is number 8, and number 8 is leisure. If there's a power outage or a situation that's disrupted your day-to-day routine, and now you're home, you don't have electricity, there's no TV, there's no internet, boredom can kick in fast. So having something as simple as just a deck of cards, maybe some puzzles or some coloring books or something for the kids, maybe some Legos or something. I grabbed these. They were in the camping bin. I always take cards camping with me. I've done so since I was a teenager. Nothing beats solitaire, when you're backpacking or camping by yourself. Play a couple games of solitaire. It passes the time, and, it keeps you from, wondering, what was that noise? What was that noise? So, that can kick in very quickly, especially when you're under a stressful situation like a power outage or, God forbid, a civil unrest or something. But, just a couple of decks of cards, I keep them around for leisure. You definitely want to have something to keep your mind kind of busy, or definitely something to keep your kids a little bit busy. Otherwise, they'll start going stir crazy, and that just makes your situation go from bad to worse. So, number 8 on the list, and I think it's just as important as all the rest of this stuff, is, some sort of leisure activity that doesn't require an internet connection or power, which is, board games or decks of cards or something along those lines. And, I would definitely think about that. I know the Goodwill. I've seen board games at the Goodwill for 50 cents for Candyland or whatever, you know, and it may not be something you're going to use very often, but when the situation ends up landing in your lap and there's no power and your kids are bouncing off the walls because they're bored and they don't know what to do, you know, you can kill a good 30 minutes to an hour with a good fun game of Candyland or Chutes and Ladders or, you know, one of those. So, you know, they're fairly easy. You know, you get a couple decks of cards. These are rolled gold pretzel cards. These were probably free. I have no idea where I got these or how old they are, but, you know, decks of cards aren't expensive. Half the time you can pick them up pretty cheap, you know, at different stores, you know, probably yard sales, flea markets, whatever, as well as board games and coloring books and, you know, stuff like that. You know, that stuff's not hateful to get, not expensive, unless you go absolutely crazy, you know, with buying stuff that you don't need. But again, let me circle all the way back to keeping it simple. So, you know, I hope you learned something from all this, you know, with the exception of firearms, which, you know, firearms can get pricey. There are inexpensive firearms and there are pricey firearms, but firearms are one of those decisions that, you know, you either have to be committed or not, you know, and not everybody is, and that's okay. If you feel safe and secure just with a flashlight or a stun gun or a baseball bat or you know, something along those lines, something that's not a firearm, then by all means, you know, whatever makes you feel as though you're safe in a situation that could become unsafe to you. Could be just as simple as, you know, locking your door and putting the piece of wood in the window so it can't be forced open, or putting the bar on the sliding glass door so it can't be you know, forced open, or you know, locking your deadbolt. You know, all of these are deterrents in the realm of security, as well as, you know, your dog, or, you know, having some extra flashlights or whatever. So I'm certainly not going to push firearms, you know, as a necessity, because it's really not. Definitely helpful. It's a tool, just like everything else here. It gives you an option, and, you know, that's really what it's all about, is having options in situations like that. So, you know, I've rambled on long enough. I hope that everybody learned something. I know every time I, you know, watch some YouTube, you know, I learn stuff. You know, I watch videos. I watch in fact, I've been watching, and let me give a shout out to Gen X Thinks. His name is Jesse. He had reached out to me a couple of days ago about doing some collaboration stuff, you know, between our two channels, and, you know, I'm looking forward to that. And I tuned into a couple of his live podcasts, and I believe some of his viewers have, you know, checked out my channel and have subscribed, and I'm really grateful for that. You know, I hope, you know, that you learned something, or at least I'm helpful, and certainly welcome. So to those that have just joined us or joined me, you know, let me say again, welcome. Thanks for coming, and, you know, I hope I didn't bore you, and hope you learned something. So until the next video, keep your head on a swivel.